Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric, and since I just went to Six Flags Magic Mountain, today I am ranking all of the roller coasters there. Before we get to the ranking, make sure you know, this is entirely subjective. It's based on my experiences and preferences. We all look for different things in roller coasters and all get different experiences. So you should know, if you agree with every spot on this list, there is almost definitely something wrong with you. Because it's a very weird list. I'll also point out I'm not really going to rank the kiddie coasters, and Wonder Woman Flight of Courage was not built yet, so I won't be ranking that. But here are all 19 roller coasters at Magic Mountain ranked. Number 19, 18, 17, 16 is the kiddie coasters. I think I went on some of these in my first visit, but not all of them. I'm sure they're all very similar in ranking. Not really anything important for those. They all just kind of rank in the bottom. Because there's no roller coaster at Magic Mountain bad enough that I think it's worse than a kiddie coaster. Moving on to the important ones. 15 is Gold Rusher. As far as mine trains go, this one's definitely not my favorite. I hear a lot of good things about it, but I actually thought it was kind of rough. One of the rougher mine trains, and while I do kind of like the terrain and think it's a fun one, it's not great overall. Number 14 is Viper. Look, I went in with an open mind. I really did. Everyone was telling me how great it's become, but it was still pretty rough. There were parts I enjoyed, but most of the loops and inversions kind of slammed me. And even that strange return to the station wasn't exactly that comfortable. So I really did want to enjoy this one. But unfortunately, it was just too bumpy for me to really say it was great. I know a lot of people think this is one of the best era loopers, but I think it's definitely not really that high up there. Number 13 is Revolution / New Revolution / whatever Revolution it's called now. It's a fun, somewhat meandering Schwarzkopf looper. I prefer Scorpion at Busch Gardens, as even though it's not as spread out and doesn't have as much terrain, it's much faster feeling and more intense. I love the vertical loop on Revolution, but there's not a whole lot else to say about this one. It's fine and it looks nice, but it's not great. Number 12 is Ninja. A really strong aero suspended coaster. I enjoy the suspended coasters a lot. This one is pretty intense, honestly. It feels tall, and I enjoy the entirety of the ride. The final lift hill thing is, of course, kind of weird, but it's because of how the terrain is, and I enjoy it a lot overall. Number 11 is Scream. The first really large, thrilling coaster here. Coaster Dash said go in with an open mind, you know? And I did. I really went in thinking, alright, it's gonna be good this time. But I still think this is my least favorite floorless coaster. Some parts were rough, and most parts just didn't have a whole lot of forces to them. I can't really name a single part of the ride I thought was great. There were parts that were fine, but I just didn't think it was a great floorless coaster overall. It holds its speed pretty well, and I'll give it that, but other than that, compared to Medusa, which I rode just a day after, it's not in the same league. It doesn't feel as forceful, intense, and it doesn't have as much smoothness, so overall, I just don't think it's a really strong roller coaster, and definitely ranks near the bottom of major coasters at Magic Mountain. Number 10 is Goliath. Goliath, a lot of people really hate this ride. I think it gets too much hate, even though it barely made the top 10 for Magic Mountain coasters. For me, literally every aspect of the ride is good, not great. The first drop is good, but not super intense and doesn't give you airtime, so it's just fine. The intensity parts, for the most part, are good, and I like the Helix, but it's not the best sensation of intensity, so it's not great per se. There were minor bits of floater airtime that I got at points, but very minor, so it's fine, but not great. And the ride's speed, it doesn't quite feel like 85 miles per hour. So again, good, not great. Not much else to say about it. It gets a little too much hate, as some people think it's a horrible ride, but it's an okay hyper. Every aspect of it is decent, and it's still a good ride, but not a great one. Number 9 is West Coast Racers. Another very shocking one, I'm sure. I went in thinking it was going to be top 5 in the park, I heard a lot of good stuff about it. I thought it looked fun. And it was. The layout is great. There's some strong moments of ejector airtime. Some of the inversions are really fun. I like the racing aspect. The track has a slight rattle, but it's not bad. All these aspects are really good. But this ride might have the most painful restraints I've ever experienced. No one else in my party had the same issue, but the hard plastic tops of the comfort collar, or whatever this one's called, I don't know if it's also considered a comfort collar, I hit my head against them very often, and it was the most pain I'd ever felt on any roller coaster, I think, with the exception of maybe SLCs. This is something I wasn't really expecting on the ride, and I also thought parts of the ride were a bit janky, but the ride is good, but the restraints kind of hold it back from it possibly being way better than Full Throttle even. But overall, it's still a good ride. It's just held back by that thing that really did bother me. Maybe I just got bad rides, but I just think it really brought down the whole thing. Number 8 is Superman Escape from Krypton. This is a tough one because the front and back are very different experiences. By that I mean going forwards or going backwards. The forward track is incredibly lackluster. It feels like you're going 60 miles per hour even though you're going 100. It goes fairly high, but you just don't get a whole lot of good forces. However, backwards, the launch feels much stronger, and the drop also feels a lot stronger. So I thought the going backwards was good. And that on its own could possibly be number 7. Very close, probably not, but the forward version just isn't as good. Number 7 is Riddler's Revenge. Riddler's Revenge is the best stand-up, I'll get that out of the way right now. I thought it was very much the Kumba of stand-up coasters. Great layout, awesome elements, fantastic pacing, but unfortunately, it did have some bumpy moments. The stand-up ride system didn't bother me too much. I know how you're supposed to stand and all to avoid the issues, but I thought there were a few headbanging moments that did kind of affect the ride. There was too many of them that I couldn't really overlook it as an overall issue, and I think if there was no headbanging, this could be higher on the list, but it is still definitely a strong ride. Number 6 is Full Throttle. Full Throttle is a fantastic roller coaster. The loop is great, I love the first launch. The elements, though not great in number, are great in quality. The backwards launch is pretty fun. The dive over Superman's path is really cool. And the airtime you get on the top hat is pretty strong. This is all great, and this could possibly be 4th best in the park with this. But the final drop, unfortunately, is a little weird in how abrupt it is because the brakes are on the drop and you're going down 160 feet or so. So the fact that you end before the ride really gets at its best is unfortunate. And obviously the ride is short and doesn't have a ton to it, so it doesn't get as high as other roller coasters that I think have more substance to them, but it is still definitely a great roller coaster. Number 5 is Apocalypse the Ride. Last time I went on this, I remember thinking it was a very family wooden coaster, but it does not mess around anymore. It's a strong GCI with a rattle that did not really bother me much. My brother definitely thought it bothered him a lot more, but I thought it was good. The ride is strong, and even though it has the rattle, it didn't bother me at all, and I just think it's intense, has some solid airtime moments, and the roughest part, honestly, was just leaving the station in the lift hill. It's very rickety, but the ride is strong, much better than I remember, and honestly, it's a pretty good roller coaster. As far as wooden coasters go, it's one of the best I've done because I've done very few good wooden coasters, but overall, I think it's a pretty strong ride in the park, and definitely earned its top 5 spot. Alright, number 4 and 3 are going to be probably the most controversial. Number 4 is Batman the Ride. I know that probably seems way too high for some of you. Most of you would probably put it 7, 8, even lower than that. But Batman the Ride, I can't help it. It's a really good invert. It's far from the strongest invert. I do prefer Banshee, Monsu, Raptor, and Afterburn. But darn, it's intense, It has all the elements. The layout's good. There's nothing wrong with it. I put it above things like Apocalypse and all because I thought this was more intense than Apocalypse. And pretty much every other ride out of the top 5 has some major flaw or something missing that's keeping it from being an amazing coaster. And even though Batman the Ride isn't super far into my top 50, it's the 4th best at Magic Mountain because honestly a lot of the supporting coasters are not quite as elite as some people tell me. Now for the top 3. You probably guessed which coasters would be in the top 3. Number 3 is X2. Do not rush to the comments immediately and say I'm wrong for not putting it at number 1. I rode X2 in the back inside seat. I've done it in other rows before. I got the best possible rides with the exception of the fact that the fire has never run when I've done the ride. And I like this ride a lot. It's in my top 25. It is intense. I really enjoy the first drop, one of the best first drops I've ever done. The music going up the lift hill is a really cool touch. The elements are really trippy and definitely things that are unique. I love all of that. It's pretty intense. It's a decently long ride. It has a lot to it. But I'm sorry. It's just not as good as Tatsu to me. I know I kind of spoiled that Tatsu's above it, but you already figured that out. I think Tatsu is better, and I'll get to that more when I talk about it. But X2 is a good ride. My experience was smooth until the very end. One part actually really hurt my dad's neck, but I thought it wasn't too bad. The roughness mildly takes away from that. I get that some people think it adds to the craziness, but I thought most of the ride was not quite as crazy as some had said. And maybe I went in with too much hype, hearing so many people say it was one of the absolute best roller coasters in the world. And it is high up there for me, but it's not as high as most people have it. It's a great ride for sure, and I love so much about it. But I just prefer the other two. And I prefer other roller coasters for the sensations that I prefer on roller coasters, such as airtime and speed. X2 is perfect at what it does, but maybe it's just not quite up my alley the same way as others are. Number 2 is Tatsu. Tatsu is actually the favorite of some members of my party, and I think it's a fantastic roller coaster. I am a sucker for the flying coaster model, even though some people don't like them for reasons I cannot even begin to understand. It's one of my favorite models. The first drop on Tatsu is quite strong. The terrain is really good. And even though the ride moves gracefully, it actually holds its speed very well. Every inversion is excellent, and the pretzel loop is the single most intense moment in all of Magic Mountain. No question. I love everything about Tatsu. It feels just as long as X2, and maybe the reason I put Tatsu above X2, I prefer the ride system first of all. And I also just thought being a perfectly smooth and pleasant experience just made it more fun than the crazy horrifyingness and extremeness that many love on X2. X2 is an awesome ride, but Tatsu is the one I enjoy more, and definitely if I could only go on one again, assuming the lines were the same, because when I went, X2 had much worse lines, I would go on Tatsu. With all that out of the way, number 1 is Twisted Colossus. My first rides on this were dueling. My last ride on it was not dueling. The dueling, surprisingly, did not make a difference for me. I like it when it's dueling, but I thought the ride was just as good without it. The airtime is incredibly strong. The first drop, despite its size, really packs a punch. The pacing is immaculate, except for, of course, the second lift hill being kind of a strange intermission, but it works, especially with the dueling aspect when you have it. But I like that you kind of go through two different rides. Both could easily be individual great RMCs. But together, they are incredibly strong. This roller coaster is still near the absolute top of my roller coasters list. I love everything about it. Perfectly smooth, intense, airtime. It's the total package. And that is my ranking. Thank you for sitting through this and hopefully not disliking, but I know this was a very, very controversial list. I know I was pretty negative about some things, but there were certain flaws on each roller coaster that I did just kind of think kind of brought them down compared to others that are similar or others in the park I like more. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this video. I'll see you next time.